We'll get started tonight. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Larry Pruitt. I've heard Larry speak before, and fantastic program, and I understand that he has greatly increased the program since we've last seen it. So without further ado, Larry, would you like to start the program, please?
Okay, thanks, Don. Our program tonight is a brief history of the life and times of Wellington Burt. And when I started to put this together, there was so much material on him, and he had such a full life. There was no way I could say the life and times of Wellington Burt because it would miss something. So this is a brief history, and as I go through it, you'll understand kind of where I'm coming from. So I'm going to sit down in a second so you guys can see. My history: grew up in BV. My great-grandfather homesteaded out on 46 by Steering Gear, and my granddad took over the farm after he passed away and ran a dairy farm out there for 50 years. And I don't know if Grandpa kind of instilled upon me the history or whatever, but I remember sitting on his lap and listening to him talk about stories about the Vassar plank road in front of the house, which was M46, and about the ship builders, shipyards down on the Saginaw River behind where the police station is now. And it just, it was just interesting listening to him. And grew up in BV, went to Buena Vista High School, started apprenticeship as a toolmaker in 1965. 1970, I married my wife, Vicki, and my daughter is with her, Amy, and spent 2 years in the service. We come out of the service and looking for a place to kind of settle down, and ended up in Taymouth Township. And found a house out there, and we've been there now, I think, 38 years. Didn't know anything about Burt. At that time, it was just the name, Burt, and there was a village I knew on the other side of the township. And went to a couple township board meetings that they held at the Burt Opera House at that time, and it was just a place. In the 1980s, I started doing family history and genealogy down to the White Library, and as I'm doing family research, I keep coming across this name, Burt, So I started copying this stuff, and I just started accumulating. So I thought, well, what the heck, put a program together, and this is, I don't know, the 6th or 7th one I've done. I've tried to update it all the time, and I want to thank Don and Carl for the invite tonight. So I'm going to sit down so you guys can see. So we'll get going on this thing. Here's an early picture of Wellington Burt. He was born in 1831 in New York. Whoops. And his parents were Luther Burt and Floridinia Horton. They both were born in New York, and they were married in 1817. At that time, they were poor dirt farmers from an old New England line. Their family traced back to Scotland in the 1640s, and the family ancestors came to the United States or to America in the 1740s. Burt's lineage included William Austin Burt, who was given credit for developing the first modern typewriter. In 1838, the head of the household, Dad, Luther Burt, moves his family to Jackson County, Michigan. At that time, Burt was 7 years old, and they ran the farm there. 1843, Luther Burt passed away. Wellington was 12 at that time, and with the guidance of his mother, he took over the manager of the farm. Pioneer life was real tough on the family, and they had a hard time. These are Burt's siblings. There's 12 kids in Burt's brothers and sisters, and Burt was the 8th oldest, ranging from age born in 1818 down to 1841, and not all of them survived. You can see the question mark, and I can't find out where they probably passed away as young young infants. Wellington attended, age 20, Wellington attended college for 2 years in Albion, and another year at Central Michigan in Adrian. At age 22, he decided to leave the world and see what he could see. So he hit the high seas working on tramp freighters. He sailed the South Pacific, New Zealand, Central and South America, and Australia. And his favorite place of all there was Melbourne, which is right down here in the southern tip of Australia. In 1857, he returned to Michigan to learn about the state's budding lumber industry. He was 26 years old at the time and hired in as a laborer in a sawmill in Pine River Sawmill, located in St. Louis, Missouri. About 6 months after he hired in, he was given a job as a foreman, and from there he started making some pretty decent wages and kind of got his foot into the lumber industry. You can see here the Saginaw Valley forests were virgin white pine forests, and you can see right there, there's a gentleman standing right there, so you can kind of get an idea how these trees were. The forest was so thick, you couldn't see daylight standing in the sky because the trees were so tall. The size of some of the trees they took down, and here on the end of this log, you can see 2029. That's the number of board feet in that log that was estimated could be cut out of it. And the log stamps here identified the lumber company that owned the land. So when I got down to the river, the lumber was sorted and sent on to the correct mill. Some of the smaller logs they used, they harvested in the wintertime here with a team of horses and the workers. 1860 in Saginaw, Wellington married Sarah Torrance. She passed away at age 27, and from that union they had 3 kids, Hattie, Jenny, and Emma. In 1864, he purchased some swamp and barren land along the west side of the river in Zilwaukee, basically now north of Zilwaukee Bridge. He established a lumber camp there, a lumber mill. He had a heading mill, shingle mill, blacksmith shops, salt works, and gas works for lightings. He had 45 homes for married workers, which he preferred to hire because they were less trouble than a single guy. And and they got their wages and they headed down to Saginaw to Water Street, which was kind of a rough area. We'll leave it at that. In 1868, the mill went into operation. He had 150 men, 2 12-hour shifts. At that time, there was no roads that went to the sawmill. Everything was brought in by ship. And he did run his office out of the sawmill, and in 12 hours they could cut 100,000 feet of lumber. The shingle mill had 25 guys and boys. The salt works, 40 men, and they produced 275 barrels of salt a day. The first half of 1874, they turned out 14 million feet of board lumber, 1 million feet of lath, 2.7 million feet of shingles, 31,000 barrels of salt, and 1,000 barrels of 1,000 barrel staves. In the 1870s, there was a major strike. 10 hours 10 hours or no sawdust was a theme that they went by, and all the mills in the Saginaw Valley shut down, and they had this militia come in, and it was quite a rough time. Burt's sawmill was one of the few that stayed open. The men there were content the way they were paid and way he treated them, and they did not walk out on the mass strike that went on. At that time, most of his lumber went to Chicago via the Saginaw River, and the salt went to to Ohio, and the salt went to Chicago and Milwaukee. He named the mill Melbourne, and it received logs down the river. It had a dock for load for shipping. In 1870, it was considered the most complete sawmill in the world. Here's a drawing of the sawmill and its location, and the Zilwaukee Bridge is going to be down here, and Melbourne Road, I believe, today is about the only thing that's left. Here's the homes of the workers, the mill here, schoolhouse, the salt works, and the dock, of course, for shipping, and which made it very easy for him to send his product to market. The Saginaw Valley with the river system of the Saginaw River and the tributaries of the Cass, the Flint, and Tippecanoe, all those fed logs to all the mills down on the Saginaw River. This one was kind of out by itself. At one time, there was 85 sawmills down the river, and I'll be honest, I can't remember how many ships came up the river in a month. It was 50, 60 ships, and today I get your newsletter, and we get 3 or 4 boats that come in, with salt or gravel or whatever, and gravel or product for Wirt's dock or the BV dock, and you can imagine that many ships, the commerce that was that used that river to come up and get that lumber from the mills. Here's a picture of the lumber camp at Melbourne, and I believe from what I can, from back here, from what I can read on my maps, the railroad was eventually put in back here, but all these logs here were stacked up waiting for process. And this kind of gives you some idea of the timber that was harvested in the Saginaw Valley, and they were stacked up here. Waiting to be rolled off into the spring with high water to bring down to the river, and down here with the sorting pens. That the guys here sorted the logs by the log stamps and sent them to the appropriate owner. Here again, a ship there on the dock, waiting. You can see all the finished lumber waiting to be loaded to take to market. A lot of Burt's lumber was shipped to New York. There was a lumber exchange at Tonawanda, and this certificate here is a capital of $100,000, and you can see Wellington R. Burt's name here on the side, and there's quite a few of these that I found down to the Castle Museum in their archives. (1877), there was a fire at Melbourne, and the Saginaw Daily News had very little information on the fire, and I found this in the Jackson Citizen. Saginaw News just said, there was a fire at the mill, and it was very, very limited. And this is kind of a short thing here, but burning of Wellington Burt's mill, company's mill, and salt works were destroyed, $200,000 loss. Burt was in New York at Tonawanda when this happened. The the Jackson newspaper said that it was in Saginaw never said a word about it, but the Jackson paper said that it was arson. There was 3 fires started that night. The watchman caught the first 2 fires and put them out. And the 3rd fire they did not find or get to in time, and it burned the whole place to the ground. And like I say, Burt was gone, and it was insured, but he never considered rebuilding it, and he just went on to other things. It's a common name here for Saginaw. It's green gold, and again you can see the board feet figured out on the end of the logs, and again the rollaways where they were getting ready to shove them into the river at high water in the spring. (1869), Wellington married again. He was a widower for a few years, and Armine Richardson, she was from Flint, and they were married in 1869, Presbyterian Church in Saginaw, and he had children of Gertrude, Charles, George, Marion, and Marvin. And I believe Marvin died as a child. This here is the Wellington R. Burt Mansion, and it was located on East Genesee Street, south of Jane's. And if you go down through that way today, it's across from where the Wright's Funeral Home used to be, but right today the city bus garage is on that location. And you can see it was quite the building, quite the home, very stately, and he was very proud of that home. Here's a 1908 picture of Bert in his carriage, and with him is Edward Hartwick. He was the editor of the Labor paper, which is a Saginaw paper at that time. Congressman Linton, who Lake Linton near the waterworks is named after. And the 3rd individual is William Brown, and he was the mayor of Saginaw at that time. And of course, right here is Mr. Burt. And it was said he had a very fine set of horses that pulled his carriage, which you can't see in this picture. But the article goes on that they were going to the dedication and groundbreaking of the Saginaw Auditorium. I did a program a year and a half ago at the Saginaw Castle Museum, and I had a lady come up to me after, and she was an elderly lady, and she says, you might want to know this. She says, my granddad was a furnace man, boiler man, and took care of 3 mansions in Saginaw. One of them was Wellington Burt. And she says, one year for Christmas, he gave my granddad a beautiful cup and saucer for a Christmas present, and I have him at home, and have it at home, And I tried to follow up on that gal, and because she told me she worked in a gift shop at the museum, and I went there after the program because I was getting ready for the program, and I tried to backtrack to find her, and nobody knew who she was, and I'm kind of still looking for her to talk more to her, But she was real proud of that thing, and she says, I'm going to leave that to the museum when she passes away. Here's Wellington Burt's log mark there, B-U-R-T, Wellington Burt. And every lumber company had their own mark, and it was like a cattle brand, to identify it. And as the timber came down the river, it was sorted in the holding pens and shoved directed to the right mill. Here's another log, ASA, log stamp on it. Back to Mr. Burt's log stamp. I've talked to a number of people, even at the museum, trying to find somebody that has a log stamp of his, and nobody has seen one. Nobody has seen a log stamp. So I only have that picture there from a book that what it actually looked like. Here's timber on the river, Saginaw River, waiting for process, and And you can see as far as you can see, this is on both sides of the river with sawmills, around Ojibwe Island, up and down the river. Wherever they had a spot, they could put up a mill. 1880, Saginaw was the white pine capital of the world. Pine was very easy to work with, and carpenters liked to work with it. When they harvested the pine in the forest, they left the hardwood because the pine was better and it floated. The hardwood didn't float so hard, and it was your oak and maple and that. They left that standing. Only later did they go back and take that as lumber, as the timber kind of depleted. But the lumber was for houses, barns, wagons, fences, buggies, bridges, barrels, shingles, buckets, and furniture. And almost all them categories had a factory or whatever, even a match factory in Saginaw that produced matches because they had the lumber to process it with. Here's a lumber camp and some shanty boys that are standing out for the photograph. And you can see in the back here was a couple ladies, and they were wives of the cooks, or they worked in the cook shack with their husbands, and they were basically the only women allowed in the camp. Shanty boys is the term for the guys that worked the lumber in this area. Lumberjacks is a term that came from Wisconsin in the later years, Wisconsin and Minnesota. And so shanty boys, and basically because these here don't look too bad, but there's some of the places are look like a log house or a log barn with a tarp paper shack, and it had one stove in it, no windows, and it was kind of like a shanty. And when the guys 12-hour day, when they were up early in the morning, and a big thing with the at the camps was the quality of the cook they had, because if there was bad food, they didn't hang around. They wanted, because they worked hard, they come in, they were hungry, they wanted to be fed good, and so the better the cook, the better crew they had. And at the table, there was so many different nationalities of guys. There was German, there was Hungarian, French, whatever. They were not allowed to talk at the table because one wouldn't understand what the other one was saying, and before you know it, there was a fight. So that was the rule: no eating, no talking at the dinner table. When Michigan was opened up to settlers, basically from the 1819 Indian Treaty in Saginaw, Governor Cass and some of his representatives negotiated, and I forget how many million acres of land that they bought from the native Chippewas, and they wanted to settle Michigan. The speculators came in from the East Coast and bought the land at $1.25 an acre. And this is an example of cut and run. And this is what was left when they moved on to the next section or the next their next location to harvest some more lumber. One thing about, there was all the speculators, like I say, came from the East Coast. Burt and a couple other lumber barons remained in Saginaw. A lot of them from the East Coast, when they came, they made their money and they went back to the East Coast, and they cut and run. That's what it's called. Here's a big wheel used in the when there was no snow or winter during the winter, and it helped carry the logs to the either to the train or to the shore, to where they put in a rollaway. They shoved in the water at springtime. If you get up by Sanford, just east of town, at their museum up there, they do have a rollaway sitting out in the yard on display. Again, here's the lumber operations in the wintertime, and you can see the logs stacked up here waiting to be hauled, and teams of the horses. And the lumber camps took excellent care of their horses, and they are a very important part of the camp. Again, some more size of the example, the size of trees, and there's two men here on a two-man saw right here, and that tree is probably in excess of close to 4 foot in diameter, and pretty good size. You can imagine the board feet of lumber that came out of that tree. As the lumber movement progressed and modernized, they brought rails in and railroad, and to haul the lumber. Once this area here was stripped out and all the lumber was hauled out, they pulled up the tracks, and that lumber company, they had the train, they moved to the next section and used it again. Here's some rafting pins used on the river to tie logs together to make a raft, and once they were sorted and they floated, and it was just kind of a keeper to keep the logs sorted. And every now and then people are still picking these up along the river at low tide. Here's an example. Once the timber in the Saginaw Valley started to be depleted, they had no raw material to run the sawmills. So a lot of the big lumber companies went east across Lake Huron into Canada and started harvesting timber over there. And this was a raft that was floated back across the lake to the timber, or to the sawmills, and their timber was processed here to keep the sawmills going. That went for a few years until Canada decided that enough of this stuff, and they put a big high tariff on it, and the mills in the Saginaw Valley were forced to shut down because of the lack of timber. From the land records I've researched, from 1872 to 1903, Burt had purchased 19,317 acres of timberland. So you can imagine how much wood he harvested and made money off of. And they call it green gold. This is my, I failed art class, so I threw it in there. Tobacco story. Bert, lived in Saginaw, and he went down one morning to his local tobacco store and walked in and wanted to buy his cheap 10-cent cigar, and told the proprietor, he knew him, and he says, "Yeah, I want my usual." The proprietor said, "Boy, your son was just here. He bought the most expensive cigar I got. Don't you want that?" And he goes, "Nope. I don't have a rich dad like he does." So yeah. Here's a piece of Bert's stationery. There's a couple copies of this in the Castle Museum, and you can see the paper here. Didn't copy very well. Mr. Burt was very, very active in Saginaw and Michigan politics. He was a mayor of Saginaw for 2 years. He ran for governor. He served in the state senate. He was a candidate for U.S. House of Representatives. He had a lot of ideas. He wanted to do a lot of things to make the state better, make Saginaw better. And he basically gave up in Lansing. He says, this is no place for me. I can't get nothing done because of the politics and the stuff that's going on. It's like, well, what's new today, you know? Yeah. It's a 1904 photograph of family reunion at the Burt mansion. And Mr. Burt is right here. Here's Armine right here. And these all are sons and daughters from both marriages and some of the grandkids. And this this photograph was taken by the Goodrich brothers. How many of you heard of them? But they're very famous black photographers in Saginaw. And all the old logging pictures that you come across or whatever, they took the pictures, and we were very fortunate that they did. That we have some record of what what was going on at that time. I was on eBay Thursday night just looking, and I came across. I typed in Saginaw and collections. And I came across two Goodrich, and you don't see them very often, but I came across two Goodrich brothers photographs. One, the opening bid was $110. The other one was opening bid was $1,000. So they're very collectible items for somebody that's into collecting photographs. Yeah. About 1886. The editor of the newspaper in Flushing the area was really starting to get settled, and they needed a way to get products to market. And he was looking for investors to put in what they call in the paper at that time a road, which was a railroad from Durand, which is from Durand down here, which was a big rail hub at that time, and it was something like 100 and the rails crossed there at the Durand station, and something like 144 freight trains went through a day and 80 passenger trains. So they wanted to tap into that and bring that up to Saginaw. So here's the Durand station over to Lennon. Then here was Flushing, where the idea started from, and working your way north, Brent Run, Montrose, Burt, the Moline siding, Vern, all these are stops, and all the way up, and you can see here up to Melbourne, then went up to Winona Beach, and it was 60 miles of track. And the editor of the paper went looking for these investors, and they needed a lot, because it's a lot of money to put a rail line in. And he went to Bert, and he says, hey, help, you interested in investing in railroad? And Bert went, well, maybe, and it goes, the editor says, well, there's rumor has it that they're going to construct a new village right here, north of the Saginaw County line, or the Genesee County line, and they want to call it Burt. And that kind of caught his eye. And he was kind of a vain guy. He bought into the idea, so he chipped in $250,000, and turned out to be the Grand Trunk Railroad. At that time, it was the Saginaw, Cincinnati, and Mackinac Railroad. And he invested in it, and as time went on, he ended up being the president of the line, and he ended up owning a good chunk of that railroad, of course, and he was shipping a lot of his own material on that railroad. Right here at the Vern station, and this was a flag station, over in Elby over here was a coal mine, and the Vern mine. And why they call it the Vern mine, I had no idea. I mean, it was almost 6 miles from there over to Vern, and they brought this track over, and they brought the coal over, and it sat here until there was a train came through, and they tied into it and took it to market. Guess who owned that spur? Wellington Burt. So he was making money off of everything. Here's a copy of the picture of the Burt station, and you can see the train schedule there from left East Saginaw 12:30 in the afternoon and went south all the way down to Durand. and ran back and forth. This station had telegraph. There was a siding here. It was close to a couple lumber yards. Very well used for freight and passengers. In 1888, here's the executives of the rail line, and this was on the initial inspection coming through, and sorry. As you can see, here's the old boy standing here, and he was known for his felt hat and his big mustache, and you can pick him out real easy. And there's his picture. This is again on the rail inspection of the rail line, and the conductor and the cook are standing there between the cars on the siding behind the Burt station. This is a flushing station. It's the plans in that were very similar to the Burt station, and the same station in Montrose is very similar to this one. Ties to Taymouth Township and Mr. Burt. It's the 1859 map of Taymouth. At one time, at 1859, the township took in actually 3 townships, and you can see it across here. This right here is an Indian reservation called Pequannock, and it was the largest concentration of Native Americans in Saginaw Valley. Here's a photograph of downtown Burt. Here's the rail station, boarding house, saloons. This is a business district basically along here. The Opera House is right here, and we'll get to that in a minute. And this is about a mile and a half north of the county line. And of course, then you can see the rail line here, the Grand Trunk. Here's a picture of Burt about 1900. Store, post office here, hotel, couple saloons. Sawmill on the Flint River, processed logs that came down, same ideas on the Saginaw. It's the Burt Opera House, and it has ties, of course, to old Mr. Burt. This picture, 1900. The Opera House pretty much looks like it does today. Mr. Burt and a gentleman, Yeomans, was on a campaign tour. Both were running for public office, and they stopped in Burt to address the residents looking for votes. And Burt was on the podium, is talking to him, and he says, what this town needs is a good public meeting place. And he says, you really need one? He says, I will donate $1,000 for the construction of a public hall. Well, Mr. Yeomans didn't want to be outdone, so he says, I'll donate the bricks for the hall. So a lady from town donated the property to place it on, and all the construction and work was done by a lot of volunteers, laborers. And 1891, Saginaw News, the Evening News, talked about the celebration when it was dedicated, and there was over 1,000 people in attendance, which is a lot, because right now the town of Burt has maybe 200. This is a picture of the inside of the hall, and it was the news article also said that it was the finest public meeting hall in Saginaw County at that time. And the hall has, this is the pickle growers, and it's a pretty much a standard township hall. You can see there's a stage in the background where the guys are standing, and it'll seat about 100 people. It's been the location of medicine shows, college plays, high school plays, weddings, showers, baby showers, voting poll, and also of township board meetings. Here's the Opera House today, and this date plate is right here on the roof, and that's pictures about, well, 2013. So 1991, the Opera House was placed on a state historical site, and there's a big plaque out front here, which is right here next to the flagpole, and a big swing driveway that comes in, and this tells the history of the Opera House. This gentleman here, Howard Fry, was a real good friend of mine. He passed away this last summer. He was 94 years old. He was born and raised in Burt, and lived about a mile, well, he lived just north of the county line. And we were over there one day having a program, and he says, I used to work here when I was a kid. And he says, my job was, and back up. You can see these lights right here. They were carbonite lights. And he says, it was my job, if there was a program or something, event going on at night, I had to get them lights going, and also bring wood in for the wood stove. There was a great big pot-belly stove in the back corner. And he says, he had a whole lot of stories about the Opera House, but and also in the background there on the wall, our historical group 2-3 years ago, out of all the years that Opera House has been there, over 100 years, other than that sign out front, there was no recognition or anything in there about the old boy. So we funded a frame and whatnot, and did the layout with the help of the Castle Museum, and we got that put up on the wall there. It's for display for people coming in there to take a look at and get the real history of the Opera House. 1891, Mr. Burt purchased a private rail car, TW shop in Ann Arbor, and he took it to Owasso and had it revamped, and he christened it the Wolverine, which is kind of appropriate for Michigan. And if you were well-to-do, rail cars at that time, private rail cars, were the way to go. Basically a Winnebago on rails. The roads were bad. A lot of plank roads are still around, and dirt roads and whatnot. And he brought that car to Saginaw and used it for many years. This is the inside of a car that looks similar to that one. You can see the pretty plush layout, and a place to have your meal here, and there was a stove and nice plush seats to sit on, and all decorated up with tapestries and the lights up on the ceiling. The day he brought the car home to Saginaw, his wife, Armine, and one daughter, and from the Saginaw News on an article of Town Talk, which they, Aunt Jane went to see Grandma, and they had chicken dinner, all things like that. And Town Talk said, Mrs. Armine Burt and daughter took the Wolverine and went to New York shopping. So they hooked onto it and got onto the train, and they hauled it to New York. That was not a big thing to do at that time. In the same manner, this is his cottage at Frankfurt, and cottage, and it looks like a pretty good sized house. But again, articles in the newspaper took his family piled onto the Wolverine, and he had it taken over to Frankfurt. More money was made in Saginaw Valley timber than there was in the California gold rush, and but you never hear about it because always like the gold strike and everybody making it rich, and it doesn't put a candle to this here. Things that items, places were named after Burt: the Burt School, the Burt Road, Burt Township, which is in Grand Marais up in UP, the Burt Manual Training Center, the Burt Opera House, the Village of Burt, Burt High School, and Wellington R. Burt Steamship. Getting back to Maritime. Here's a current picture of the Taymouth Library, which was the original location of the Burt High School, and up here, there's a plaque on the front of the building. Of course, it's been added on to and remodeled since it was constructed. But it was a schoolhouse. The Burt High School then shut down. It went to a junior high, then it went to elementary school, and then it eventually ended up being our library, and it's a whole lot bigger than what it looks right now. The first commencement in 1909 at the Burt High School, and remarks right here, Wellington R. Burt was a guest speaker. The Burt Manual Training Center, lumber had pretty much played out in the Saginaw area, and there was a whole lot of people out of work. The mills were sitting idle, and there was just no jobs. So Burt come up with the idea of putting these guys back to work, but they had to be trained. So at that time, Saginaw, East Saginaw and Saginaw City were two different towns, two different cities, and a lot of competition between the two, east side, west side, and all that. And so Burt went to the west side, to the school district, and says, we need to do something about getting these people back to work. He says, if you guys agree, and they were both separate school districts with separate school boards. He said, if you guys agree that we form one school board, I will help fund a training center to be located on the east side of Saginaw to put these guys back to work. West side Saginaw said they didn't want to give up their political power, so they turned him down, and he said no. So he went ahead on his own, and you can see here, he had $150,000 to build a manual training center for the city, but today the city is still divided into two cities. And the training center, just a second, I catch up with my notes here. The training center, once it got going in 1903, gave classes in drafting, machining, welding, woodworking, and dining room, librarian, and it was the place to go for training. Again, going back to eBay, if you go on eBay and look for collectible items, the last count I had on there were 15 different postcards of the Burt Manual Training Center. So that tells, and this is, postcards that's probably been passed down from the families, for sale. And it just shows you the notoriety and the popularity that the place had. It was dedicated in 1903, and this is a 1901 article. This shows construction of the training center. And here it was on completion. When I got out of high school, I started an apprenticeship class as a machinist toolmaker. And I took welding classes in the basement of this school, 1967, 68. Basically north of St. Mary's Hospital. I believe on Warren Street. This plaque was in the foyer of the front entrance of the school. And it's kind of hard to make out, but it's 1903. This building was made possible by the generation of Wellington R. Burt. And then it has the Board of Education members here. And I did some research on all these names. And who are all these guys? Come to find out, this is the crew that helped build the building. And they were all millwrights on there. And then the architect and whatnot. Mr. Burt was very civic-minded. He loved the city of Saginaw, and he went on to donate money for the Saginaw Auditorium. It was one of the finest, at that time, one of the finest auditoriums in the state. Him and Mr. Dorr donated $25,000 to place a big pipe organ into the auditorium, which was considered the finest pipe organ in the state. The 1900. Oh, I just caught a thing here. This is wrong. Just seen it myself. Should be, yeah. But it's gone now. So, anyways, they put money together and they brought the New York Symphony Orchestra to play for a weekend there, and they had a choir of 400 that performed, and they said it was an outstanding program in the state at that time. Here's the laying the cornerstone of the auditorium, and you can see right here's the old boy right here with all the dignitaries. Well, the city of Saginaw, the Saginaw City on the west side, 6 years after the Burt Manual Training Center was constructed and up and running, they kind of looked across the river and says, this ain't a bad idea. So what they did, they went ahead and formed the Burt, the Arthur Hill Technical Trade School, which was located on Michigan and Gratiot, and on that location today is the McDonald's store, and they train guys and same thing the other side did, but it was an all boys school, welding, training, machining, woodworking, and whatnot. And part of my apprenticeship, I took machining classes there, 1966.
When did they knock that down?
I'm going to say in the early 1990s. It's been gone a while. I mean, yeah. Here we have the Wellington R. Burt steam passenger sidewheel steamer. It was built in Carlton by the Kelly Builders. It's 154 foot long, 23 foot wide. It had a draft of 6.5 feet. It traveled from Saginaw to Bay City carrying passengers. It was 13 stops along the way. It was licensed, like I said, to carry 500 people. At the beginning, it was paying 10 cents a ticket, and as other companies got into hauling passengers, competition started to get increased, and they had increased their price to 25 cents a ticket. But along with that, you got a shot of whiskey and a newspaper. So it worked the Saginaw River for 14 years. 1891, it was sold and moved to Bay City. 1893, it was moved to Maumee, Ohio, a navigation company. 1897 to Sandusky, and it ran tourists out to Put in Bay. 1899, it was abandoned at Sandusky and stripped down. 1901, its final enrollment, and she was towed to Venice, Ohio, and scrapped, and the hull was scrapped out, and she was put out of service. Here's the schedule. It sailed opposite of the Mason. One went south, the other went north, so they had a continuous passenger service from Saginaw to Bay City. The only guy that could write a check bigger than Wellington Burt was Henry Ford, and we all know who Henry Ford was. And there was a lot of financial bumping heads between guys like Carnegie, etc. Burt, there was things that went on that he really didn't like, and they were always in competition, but he held his own with them. Lumber, like I say, lumber played out in the Saginaw Valley, so he sent one of his cruisers after he went up to Grand Marais to Burt Township up there. That kind of started to dry up as far as timber goes, so he sent a cruiser over to Minnesota, and his cruiser bought three complete sections of timber over there near Duluth, and they started harvesting the lumber. Well, underneath the lumber was a Mesabi Range, iron. And here's a picture of guys at his open-face mine there that they mined his iron ore. So once he got the timber off, they started digging for iron ore. And he started shipping, he was the first guy over there to take the iron ore because the mine was a little ways from Lake Superior. And he was the first one to put a rail line in, and he shipped his iron ore, and of course then he shipped the other guy's iron ore. So he was making money off that, and that is still in operation today. Got another date here wrong that I just seen, this 1920, but Saginaw, after all the things that he had donated to Saginaw and tried to support, City of Saginaw felt that he wasn't paying enough taxes on his estate, and they took him to court. And he lost the court trial, and he had to pay the increase in property taxes. And as he walked out of the courtroom, past the city attorney's desk, he stopped at him and he looked at him and he says, "You guys killed the goose that laid the golden egg." And he copped an attitude right there. And he went back and he had his will written, but he had left a lot of money to the city. The YWCA, which he had helped fund, the Burt Manual Training Center, the Saginaw Auditorium, the city waterworks, all these things he struck from the will. August 1917, and this is a handwritten copy of the will, and it's 13 pages long. I have a copy of this at home that I got from the museum, and he worked real hard with this. He had 3 or 4 attorneys that helped him write this. Here's a typed copy of the will. You can see, I, Wellington Burt, City of Saginaw, Saginaw County, I do here declare and publish my last will and testament, hereby revoking all former wills by me that were made. Here's the final draft of the will. I went from 13 pages handwritten down to 6 pages typed, and quite involved. You can see here is the signature at the bottom, and he probably had he died when he was 89. He probably had tremors and whatnot, shaking, and so it was pretty signature. But you can read the Burt there and the Wellington. The original will, September of 1917, he removed his daughter, Marion Burt Stone, from the will. Her husband was a favorite of Wellington, and there was some problems there, and they ended up getting a divorce, and that didn't set right with Dad at all. Mix in what went on with the city of Saginaw. He went back and wrote that will then when he removed her. In 1918, he cut the relatives out of the will and said that nobody will receive any inheritance until 21 years after the death of his last grandchild. And the will went into a trust. He passed away in 1919. Everybody said you either loved him or hated him, and I've come across material where I've seen both sides of them, I guess, but I did this presentation at Tawas last summer, and after the program, a lady and gentleman came up to me, and I thought they were husband and wife, but they were brother and sister, and the gal says, you talked about that coffee cup. She says, our great aunt, Hilda, was Bert's cook for about 8 years, and in her younger years, and she received numerous gifts from Bert over the time that she worked for him, and so I got a hold of them, and they live in Saginaw, and I got a hold of them here a month ago and went over and spent the afternoon with them, and they brought out some of the artifacts that they have that were gifts. Well, got to back up a minute. On that will, he struck the relatives until 21 years after the death of his last grandchild, but his chauffeur, or his accountant, he left $4,000 a year for life. His chauffeur, his housekeeper, and his cook received $1,000 a year for life. And it's kind of hard to make out right here. Come on. But down here in the corner, this is dated 1970, and Aunt Hilda died in 1983, but in her time, she received $64,000 from the inheritance, $1,000 every year, and it was paid in $250 quarterly payments to her, and it all came from Second National Bank. This is a lamp that Bert gave to Aunt Hilda, and it's sitting on a table that he gave her. In the china cabinet over here is a set of dishes, and I didn't put it into the program just to keep it short. It was a complete set of dishes of china, and it was painted china, and every design on the dinner plate was hand painted, and it was different. And she showed me some of those. The table and the lamp here. Here's a figurine that she received. Here's a rocking chair and a decanter. Very beautiful. Wellington died 1919, age 87. His death certificate says he was senile, which the family tried to use that as a leverage to crack the will, and without much success. The will had the way it was written was called a spike clause, and the family did receive $200,000 that they tapped into it in Minnesota, and $5 million from the trust. Minnesota's law is different than Michigan law, and a generation skipping is not allowed in Minnesota law, and that's where the family got some of the money. There was, when his will was compiled, and I haven't found it yet, it's probably in the library at White, but there was 42 grievances that he wrote out against the family, stating why he was doing what he was doing with his will. And the lawyers used that to help protect the will. But there was years and years of needless feuds, general disappointments, and of course, then the divorce of his daughter, which really upset him. Here's another one of the court trials, 1924, when the family tried to state that he was senile and he didn't know what he was doing, and they tried to break the trust, and they were very, very unsuccessful. Bert is buried in the Burt family mausoleum in Forest Lawn Cemetery, and it is the largest mausoleum in the cemetery. And when this was built, the the road entrance from the cemetery came off of Hess Road, which was to the north, kind of on an angle behind Baker Perkins. And as you would drive in the driveway, as you come up into the cemetery, you would drive right looking at his mausoleum. In the mausoleum is, of course, his Bert, both his wives, and 2 of his younger kids are buried there. Everybody says, well, he was real vain, and he wanted to have everybody look at him when they came into the cemetery. Well, years went by, and the city closed that entrance off on the north end, and way over on the west side, off of Washington, was the interurban rail station, and they made that into, after that closed down, they made that into the cemetery office, and they put in a new gate to the entrance of the cemetery. So he went from the front of the cemetery to the back of the cemetery. 1938, the Lumberman's Monument at Tawas was constructed. There's 128 lumber barons on that monument, and on the right side, right here, second down, is Bert's name. This is his the mansion. He died in 1919. I'm not sure who owned it from them until 1928. But 1928, it was purchased by a group and was made into the Commodore's Arms apartment house. And of course, with 38 rooms in it, they made it into, and they stuck $100,000 into remodeling this place into an apartment house, and operated that way as an apartment house for over 30 years. 1959, it was taken down, and there was all kinds of rumors. There was money stashed in the walls and whatnot, and they never found anything. But it came down. Before it came down, Paul here, his son-in-law, was on the demolition crew when they were there taking it down, and he saved this fireplace face that was going to be, scrapped out, and he saved it, and they gave it to Paul, and he refinished it, and it's now sitting in their front room. And I took this picture. It was just after Christmas, and his wife had it. I wish I'd have got over there about 4 days quicker. She had taken off all the Christmas decorations on that. But this fireplace was in one of the 7 that was in the house. 1967, Bert was inducted into the Saginaw County Hall of Fame, and there's one of the gentlemen over here has a book about the Hall of Fame, and he showed it to me when we were at the break. And but that's his picture in there of the Hall of Fame. Genealogy Bank of Michigan is an archives bank that a company went around and bought up all newspapers, and it's kind of a Google program, and it's by subscription, and you would type in a name or a place, and it would search, and it would tell you where, what newspaper it was in, what page it was on, what day it was on, and everything, and then you could go in and find the newspaper. And in that genealogy bank, there's 3,000, 3,200, almost 3,300 articles on or about Mr. Burt. So he was, almost every week you could pick a newspaper up and find out where he bought this, he bought that, he was here, he ran for this, he had to address Congress or whatever. He was a very active man. 2011 was the day that I got back up. 1989, when Marion Lansdale, which was his youngest great-granddaughter, passed away in 1989, that kicked in the clock of the 21 years. And 2011 is when all this came to the forefront, and they had to settle the will and close out the trust. And this is article from the Saginaw paper. One of the Saginaw sugar daddies. He took care of Saginaw until they kind of messed him over. And this is a big front page article in the paper. Here's Judge McGraw, another copy of his will here. And there was 40 boxes of material that went with this trust. And you can imagine that went for 72 years after his death. And all the reports and the financial statements and everything, and the bank had to looked after all that. And here's his family tree. Wife Armine, Sarah, their kids, their grandkids, and here is Marion. That was the last great the grandchild, and when she died in 1989, it kicked it in. And then, depending on the generation and how it all played out, I'm not quite sure, but they researched it all and decided who was going to get who. There was 30 descendants, and children and great-grandchildren died before the inheritance could be distributed. Like I say, there was 40 boxes. The inheritance was divided up from the highest of $15.2 million down to $2.9 million. And here's the final 12 people, great-great-grandchildren down to let's see here. There was three great-grandchildren, 7 great-great-grandchildren, and 2 three great-grandchildren that received money. The highest, and there was a percentage formula worked out, which I didn't put up here, but depending on their generation and how close they were to Grandpa, the highest is $15.2 million, down to $2.7 million, and a total of $104 million was distributed. People that made money off this thing was Second National Bank. They had to do a genealogical research to figure out who was the closest related. That cost $66,000. And then every one of these people all had an attorney that represented them, and it took 7 months for them to finally all come to an agreement how this thing was going to be divvied up and settled. But $104 million went out. This concludes our program on Wellington Burt. One of the titles he had was noted by as the Lone Pine, because he was a loner towards the end of his life, and that's what they kind of hung on him. And my acknowledgments was our Township Historical Association, our Township Library, the Public Library, the Mills History of Saginaw, that's Saginaw Daily News, Ron Bloomfield of Bay County Historical, Castle Museum. Gotta go back here for your White Library. Anybody who wants to do genealogy, this is one of the best places in the state. And these 3 guys, 2 guys and gal here, Leo and Chris and Stacy, if it's out there, they'll help you find it. Castle Museum, Tom Tromley, maybe some of you guys know him. He's the assistant director. Sandy Schwann is the curator. Mike Fabian helped me with some of the pictures. Rich Patton with a computer. And this thesis by Esther Scott, I found at the library there one day talking to Leo, and he says, have you read that thesis about Bert that was written years ago? And I says, no. So he took me in the back room where, shelves, and he dug this thing out, and it was 238 pages on onion-like paper that was typed one side, and this gal wrote her her thesis for college in 1938, and she had her references. She must have worked on this thing for 10 years, but it was quite the eye-opening thing. Problem was, it went up into the 40s, and she stopped it. And of course, the will was long time into the future, and there was nothing on the will. But it sure a lot of the political stuff that he was into and whatnot. But Esther, she's gone now, but that was her thesis. Sue and Ken were the gal and guy that helped with show me the furniture, and Paul and Nancy Fort here on the fireplace. So that's end of it. So if anybody got any questions, we'll try to answer them.
Any questions for me? Nice job.
Yeah, why'd they tear the house down? Did you say they tore the house down, sir?
Yeah.
What was the reason for it? You don't know why they tore the home down?
You mean the mansion?
Yeah.
Just probably old, and I don't know that they couldn't make money, whatever, and it was old, probably close to 100 years old.
It's like everything else.
Like anything else that's old, they tear it down.